All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's come to order and go on the record, please. I'm Charlotte Mitchell, Chair of the North Carolina Utilities Commission, and with me this afternoon are the following commissioners. When I announce your name, please indicate your presence. Commissioner Brown-Bland.
I'm here.
Commissioner Gray.
Present.
Commissioner Clodfelter.
Yes, good afternoon.
Commissioner Duffley.
Good afternoon.
Commissioner Hughes.
Good afternoon.
And Commissioner McKissick.
Good afternoon, present.
I now call for hearing docket number E-7 sub 1250 on February 23rd, 2021, Duke Energy Carolinas LLC, to which I will refer hereafter as DEC or DEC, filed confidential and public versions of its application to address the fuel and fuel-related cost components of its electric utility rates, together with the testimony and exhibits of Brian Sykes, Kevin Houston, John Verderami, Steve Immel, and Stephen Capps. The proceeding was assigned docket number E-7 sub 1250. On March 18th, the Commission issued its order scheduling hearing, requiring filing of testimony, establishing discovery guidelines, requiring public notice, which among other things scheduled a public witness hearing and an expert witness hearing for June 1st to be held remotely, both of which were to be held remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Carolina Utility Customers Association, Inc., the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, the Sierra Club, and the Carolina Industrial Group for Fair Utility Rates 3 petitioned for and were granted the right to intervene in this proceeding. The public staff is also a party to the proceeding by operation of North Carolina General Statute 62-15 sub D. On March 29th, 2021, DEC filed supplemental testimony and exhibits of Brian Sykes. On May 10th, 2021, the public staff filed a notice of affidavit, the affidavit of June Chu, and the direct testimony of Dustin Mentz. On May 17th, 2021, the Sierra Club filed confidential and public versions of the direct testimony and exhibits of Debbie Glick. On May 24th, 2021, DEC and the public staff filed a joint motion to request that company witness Sykes, Houston, and Capps and public staff witnesses Chu and Metz be excused from appearing at the expert witness hearing, and that the pre-filed testimony, exhibits, and affidavits of the respective witnesses be received into evidence and made a part of the record in this matter. This motion was allowed by order of the Commission dated May 28, 2021. On May 27th, 2021, DEC filed a motion requesting that the public witness hearing scheduled for this proceeding be canceled due to the fact that no public witnesses had registered to testify, which motion was allowed by order of the Commission dated May 28, 2021. Also, on May 27, 2021, DEC filed the rebuttal testimony of John Verderami. On May 25th and on May 27th, DEC filed affidavits of publication for the initial public notice and second public notice as required by the Commission's scheduling order in this matter. All right, that brings us to today. Each of the parties to the proceeding filed in this docket consent to hold the evidentiary hearing by remote means. Let me remind you, as we're conducting the hearing remotely, please be mindful of not causing or creating interference with my ability or with the court reporter's ability to hear the witnesses or counsel. Please do not unmute your microphone if you are not speaking. If you must speak during the proceeding, please indicate your name first so that the court reporter and I can be certain as to who is speaking. Okay, let's get started. Pursuant to the State Ethics Act, I remind all members of the Commission of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest and inquire at this time as to whether any commissioner has a known conflict of interest with respect to the matters coming before us this afternoon. All right, the record will reflect that no conflicts have been identified, so we'll go ahead and proceed. I'll call upon the parties to announce their appearances, beginning with DEC.
Chair Mitchell, Robert Kaler, appearing on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Kaler. All right, interveners.
Good afternoon, Chair Mitchell, members of the Commission. This is Gudrun Thompson, appearing on behalf of the Sierra Club. And with me is my co-counsel, Tyrell Moore, also appearing on behalf of the Sierra Club.
Good afternoon, Ms. Thompson.
Good afternoon, Chair Mitchell and other members of the Commission. I'm William Z. Creech,
with the public staff, and joining me is John Little, all on behalf of the using and consuming public. Thank
All
you.
right, good afternoon, Mr. Creech.
Madam Chairman, this is Jeff Gray, a law firm of Bailey and Dixon, appearing on behalf of the intervener Carolina Industrial Group for Fair Utilities Rates 3 or Seek for 3.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gray. Any other counsel making an appearance today? All right, before we begin then, any preliminary matters that the commission needs to take up before we move into the hearing?
Chair Mitchell, Robert Kaler on behalf of Duke Energy. We would like to offer as a panel for their direct testimony our witness Emil and Verderami, and then because the parties indicate there would be cross of both of them, and then we would like for them to step down, and after Sierra witness Glick testifies, we'd like to bring Mr. Verderami back for his rebuttal testimony.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaler. Any objections to order of witnesses as proposed by Mr. Kaler? Ms. Thompson? All right, I'm hearing no objection. So Mr. Kaler, Ms. Thompson, there you are. Any objection? Ms. Thompson, your video is going in and out.
Sorry, I turned it on and then turned it off again, Chair Mitchell. We have
Okay.
no objection to that. Just one thing to note, we had conferred with Duke Counsel about having two attorneys cross the panel, one for Mr. Emil and one for Verderami, and Counsel for Duke had indicated no objection to that. And so with that, no objection to them being presented as a panel.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Thompson.
No objection from the public staff either. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Creech.
And
All
no
right.
objection from Sigford.
All right, with that, we will proceed. Mr. Kaler, the case is with you.
Yes, we would call Steve Emil. Mr. Emil?
I'm here, Robert. Yes.
All right, Mr. Kaler, do you want to call both your witnesses? That way we can affirm them at the same.
Yes, I will call Mr. Verderami also.
Okay. All right, Mr. Verderami, let me make sure I can. There you are, Mr. Emil. Where are you on my screen? All right, there you are, Mr. Emil. All right, gentlemen, would you raise your right hands, please? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Yes.
All right, Mr. Kaler.
Thank you. Mr. Emil, state your name and address for the record, please.
Steve Emil, work for Duke Energy located at 526 South Church Street in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And in what capacity do you work for Duke Energy?
I am the Vice President of the Fleet Transition Strategy.
And did you pre-file testimony, direct testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, sir, I did.
Do you have any additions or correction to that pre-filed testimony?
No, sir.
At this time, would you proceed to, I believe you made a summary of that. Would you proceed? Well, first of all, I'd ask the chair that testimony to be copied into the record as if given orally.
All right, Mr. Kaler, hearing no objection to your motion, the 12 pages of direct testimony filed on February 23rd, 2021 by witness Steve Emil shall be copied in the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Emil, would you proceed with a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, sir. The purpose of my testimony is to describe DEC's fossil hydro generation portfolio, discuss the performance of DEC's fossil hydro facilities during the review period of January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020, provide information on significant fossil hydro outages that occurred during the review period, and discuss DEC's environmental compliance efforts. DEC's fossil hydro generation portfolio consists of approximately 15,043 megawatts of generating capacity. This includes 6,764 megawatts of coal-fired generation, 3,277 megawatts of hydroelectric generation, 2,633 megawatts of natural gas combustion turbine generation, 2,116 megawatts of natural gas combined cycle generation, 170 megawatts of steam natural gas, 71 megawatts of solar, and 13 megawatts of combined heat and power. The company's fossil hydro generating units operated efficiently and reliably during the review period. DEC's total system generation was 95 million megawatt hours, of which approximately 37% was provided by the fossil hydro fleet. The breakdown includes 16% contribution from coal-fired stations, approximately 15% contribution from combined cycle operations, 1% contribution from the CTs, the combustion turbines, and 2.5% contribution from the hydro facilities, and 0.2% from the solar facilities. This concludes my direct testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Emmel. Mr. Verderami, would you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Good afternoon. My name is John Verderami. I work for Duke Energy at 526 South Church Street, Charlotte, North Carolina.
And in what capacity are you employed by the company?
I'm the Vice President of the Fuels and Systems Optimization Group.
And did you cause to have pre-filed in this testimony this proceeding direct testimony consisting of 11 pages?
I did.
Do you have any additions or corrections to that testimony?
No, I don't.
And did you also have, I believe, 3 direct exhibits? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I believe one of those was confidential. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would ask that the direct testimony of Mr. Verderami be copied into the record as if given orally on the stand today.
All right, Mr. Kaler, hearing no objection to that motion, the direct testimony of Mr. Verderami filed on February 23rd, 2021, consisting of 11 pages, will be copied into the record as if delivered orally from the stand.
And that his exhibits be identified as they are marked.
And the 3 exhibits attached to that testimony will be identified as marked when pre-filed, noting that one of them is confidential.
Thank you. Mr. Verderami, do you have a summary of your direct testimony?
I do.
Please proceed.
In my direct testimony, I described DEC's fossil fuel purchasing practices, provided actual fossil fuel costs for the period January 1, 2020 through December 31, 2020, the test period, versus the period January 1, 2019 through December 31, 2019, the prior test period, and describe changes projected for the billing period of September 1, 21 through August 31, 2022, the billing period. No party to this proceeding has filed testimony recommending a disallowance of any costs incurred by DEC.
Does that conclude your summary?
It does.
Chair Mitchell, at this time, the panel is available for cross-examination.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaler. Ms. Thompson, you all are up.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Goodwin Thompson representing the Sierra Club in this proceeding.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. All of my questions are going to be for you, Mr. Emmel. Mr. Emmel, your title is Vice President of Fleet Transition Strategy for Duke Energy, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you've held that position since 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
Just prior to taking your current position, you were Vice President of Carolina's coal generation for DEC and DEP, is that right?
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
Now, is the Vice President of Fleet Transition Strategy, your current position, was that a newly created position at the time that you assumed that position?
Yes, it was roughly in the April timeframe of 2020. Yes, ma'am.
And was your old position eliminated, or did somebody else move into that position?
Somebody else has moved into that position. Yes, ma'am.
And who is that?
That is Julie Turner.
Thank you. Mr. Emmel, you testified in your direct that generation from the company's coal-fired power plants accounted for about 16% of the company's total coal generation in the calendar year 2020 test period. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
And then generation from Belews Creek, Cliffside, and Marshall added up to about 97% of coal-fired generation during that same test period.
It's subject to check, but yes, ma'am.
So does that mean with just using lawyer arithmetic, given that Allen's the only other plant on the system, would I be right in inferring that the Allen units accounted for about 3% of coal-fired generation during that period?
That would be correct.
Okay. Now, you also testified that Ballew's, Cliffside, and Marshall have typically ranked as some of the most efficient coal-fired generating stations in the nation. Do you recall that?
I do, yes.
Now, when you say typically, what time period are you referring to?
Is as recent as the past couple of years, yes.
Okay, so
And
that
historically, yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
And also historically, they have won efficiency awards for quite some time.
And so that when you say recently as the past couple of years, does that include the test period?
It'd be subject to check, ma'am. I'm not sure if test period is in there.
Okay, so subject to check. So you're not basing that, when you say they typically ranked as some of the most efficient coal-fired generating stations in the nation, you're not basing that on specific performance during the test period, that particular statement?
I'd have to go back and check it. Yes.
Fair enough. Now, when the company's making decisions to commit and dispatch its coal plants, you're not comparing your coal plants to other coal plants around the country. You're comparing them with other resources on the company's system. Isn't that right?
Yes, we dispatch internally to the DEC DEP system. Correct.
Okay, and you had testified that the Ballew's, Cliffside, and Marshall were some of the most efficient plants in the nation. When you say more efficient or most efficient, does that mean in terms of how much fuel the plant is burning?
Yes, efficiency would be measured by heat rate, which is the amount of energy, thermal energy it takes to convert to a kilowatt hour. So the efficiency or the heat rate of those three facilities is extremely efficient compared to the industry, yes.
So just in layperson's term, if you have a lower heat rate, you're burning less fuel.
Less fuel, same amount of energy, yes.
Okay.
Miles per.
That's a good analogy, thank you. So given that DEC has some of the most efficient coal units in the country, you would expect to have some of the lowest fuel costs per unit of generation among all coal plants in the country, wouldn't you?
I would think so, but I'm not familiar with cost in comparison to the industry.
Now, you specifically called out Ballew's, Cliffside, and Marshall as some of the most efficient coal plants. I noticed you omitted Allen. How do the Allen units compare with the company's other coal plants in terms of efficiency?
Allen is certainly an older facility. Its heat rate is not as efficient as the plants you just mentioned. So in terms of comparison, its heat rate is not as good. It's not as efficient, much older facility. Now,
you also discussed some of the key measures that are used to evaluate the operational performance of the company's generating units. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
I'm going to ask you about just a couple of those. One of those key measures is something called net capacity factor. Is that right?
Yes, there is a measurement called net capacity factor. Yes.
And that measure, abbreviated NCF, measures the generation that a facility actually produces against the amount of generation that theoretically could be produced in a given time period. Does that sound right?
It does. Mm-hmm.
And that's that's one of the key measures that you identified in your direct testimony for evaluating the operational performance of the company's coal plants.
No, I don't believe so. The net capacity factor is not a measure of performance. What I said in testimony was the measure of performance were things like equivalent availability factor, equivalent forced outage rate, equivalent forced outage factor. Net capacity factor is not a measurement of performance. It's a measurement of how much the plant ran.
All right, well then, let's turn to page 8 of your testimony, and maybe you can just clear this up for me. If you could turn to page 8 of your pre-filed direct testimony, and there's a question at line 6 and 7 of that page.
Yes, I'm on page 8. Yes, I see the question. Mhm.
Okay, so you see where the question says, please discuss the operational results for DEC's fossil hydro solar fleet during the test period.
Yes.
Okay, and then on lines 9 and 10, just below that, there's a sentence that starts, the following key measures are used to evaluate the operational performance depending on the generator type. And if you scroll down a little bit or read down a little bit on line 14, net capacity factor is one of the measures that are listed in that sentence. Do you see that?
It does, and if I could read a couple sentences after where it mentions that, it says net capacity factor, which measures the generation that a facility actually produces against the amount of generation that theoretically could be produced in a given time period based upon its maximum dependable capacity. In that net capacity factor is affected by the dispatch of the unit to serve customer needs. So it is a measure of how much it ran. It's not a measure of the performance.
Okay.
It's how it was economically dispatched, which would tell you the capacity factor.
All right. I think I understand. What is well then just, can you explain a little bit then what that net capacity factor metric tells you other than just how much it ran? What's the significance of that?
Well, it would have an impact on things like our maintenance strategies around that unit. And since it's not being called upon as frequently for economic dispatch, since it is not as efficient as a unit as others that would dispatch before it, it would change our maintenance practices. We would perform less frequent maintenance. It'd be performed on runtime of equipment versus period time of equipment. So it would impact our maintenance strategy for sure.
All right. Another one of the key measures that you called out in that sentence that starts with the following key measures are used to evaluate the operational performance is the equivalent forced outage rate, or E4. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does.
And with the E4, am I correct that a lower E4 is better in layperson's terms?
Yes, it is better. Yes.
Okay. There's a table on, if I could refer you to page 9 of your testimony, there's a table on page 9. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. At the top, it's the third column from the left, top row, where it says review period. Can you just, is the review period the test period, or what is that review period?
It would be the test period.
Okay, so that table on page 9 shows the E4 for the company's coal fleet was higher than the NERC, was higher during the test period at 72.3, or sorry, hang on, let me, I think I'm getting tangled up. E4, yeah, there we go. Sorry, wrong, I had the wrong percentage. The E4 there under review period for the company's coal fleet, 15.1%. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that E4 was actually higher during the test period than the number you're comparing it to, which was the NERC average over the 2015 to 2019 period. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Why was that?
So again, if I go back to a little bit of a definition on equivalent forced outage rate, that is the time a generator is forced out of availability due to some type of mechanical issue. divided by the amount of hours that the unit is available during the year. And so we had two fairly significant events at two of our generators that makes up probably 75% of that 15% forced outage number there. Both of them happened at Marshall Station. Marshall Unit 3, we had a spring planned outage. A planned generator outage means you're planning maintenance. It doesn't impact this forced outage rate. It's planned. However, if the outage runs longer than the planned outage, then it's considered forced out, which would have an impact on this. So in the spring outage on Marshall 3, where we were installing some of our dual fuel equipment, as you recall, that's when the pandemic started, spring of last year. And so when the pandemic started, there was an attempt to work through that. Most of these were contract resources. They were impacted by the pandemic. It extended that outage period by some 45 days due to availability of resources, due to the efficiency of the workers not to work closely together. So that had a dramatic impact. That probably had a 30% impact on that 15% number, just that one outage. And in the second significant outage, which probably would make up for the another 40% of that 15% number, would be Marshall Unit 4. We had a short in the generator rotor, which was fairly catastrophic. It melted copper and some other things, and it ended up in an extended forced outage of approximately 70 days. So those two events alone would account for 75% of the 15%.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Let's move on to another point you made in your direct testimony. You mentioned the joint dispatch agreement between the company and Duke Energy Progress, and you note that this joint dispatch agreement, or JDA, allows generating resources for DEC and DEP to be dispatched as a single system. The DEC customers benefit from the lowest cost resources available. That was on page 7 of your testimony. Does that sound right to you? And I can refer you to the specific part if you would like. Page 7, lines 14 through 16. Oh, Mr. Immel, I believe you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am, I see that.
Okay. Are you aware that the company and Duke Energy Progress filed reply comments with the commission this past Friday in the Integrated Resource Planning docket, which is docket E100 sub 165?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay, well, I'll represent to you that they did, and in those comments, the companies said that the commission's approval of the merger, that would be the merger between Duke Energy and Progress Energy, was conditioned upon the joint dispatch agreement not being interpreted as providing for or requiring a single integrated electric system.
Objection, not relevant to this proceeding.
Chair Mitchell, may I be heard?
Yeah, please do so, Ms. Thompson.
Well, I had just asked Mr. Immel about a point in his testimony where he says the joint dispatch agreement allows generating resources for DEC and DEP to be dispatched as a single system, which was a quote from his testimony. And so I believe it is relevant that the company in the separate filing said that essentially the JDA cannot be interpreted to provide for a single integrated electric system.
All right, Mr. Kaler, did you want to say something else?
Well, he just said he wasn't familiar with that file.
All right, I'm going to overrule the objection. I'll allow the witness to answer the question to the best of his ability, and we'll give the response the weight that it's due. So please proceed to answer the question, assuming you remember it, Mr. Emmel.
So could I ask to repeat the question, please?
I actually hadn't quite gotten to my question, Mr. Emmel. I was sort of setting it up. So you recall I referred to the reply comments, and I'll in the IRP docket, I'll just repeat that quote, and then I'll ask you my question, if that's okay.
That'd be good.
Okay, so in those reply comments in the IRP docket, the company said that the commission's approval of the merger was conditioned upon the joint dispatch agreement not being interpreted as providing for or requiring a single integrated electric system. So I'll just ask you to accept that filing was made subject to check and included that statement.
And I will continue with my objection, Madam Chair.
All right, and I'll overrule the objection again.
Okay,
Mr.
so
Emmel,
the
please.
question.
And so, Mr. Emmel, my question is it your testimony that the joint dispatch agreement allows the generating resources for DEC and DEP to be dispatched as a single system?
So my response would be, the best my ability response is, unit commitment and dispatch is determined per DEC and DEP jurisdictions. And so the day ahead planning, the amount of reserve margin that's required is looked at in individual jurisdictions. It's not looked at in total. It's looked at in individual DEC and DEP jurisdictions, and the units are dispatched in those individual jurisdictions. This comment about the joint dispatch agreement, when we have those opportunities and we have enough transmission capabilities to share energy back and forth, is when we do that. So that would be the way I would respond.
So you've actually anticipated and I think answered all the questions I was going to ask you, but let me just make sure. Let me just confirm a couple things. So the company and DEP do not have a reserve sharing agreement, correct?
The what? Pardon?
The DE Carolinas and DE Progress do not have any kind of reserve sharing agreement, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
And they also do not share firm capacity, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
So I think I've just understood you to say when you were explaining that under the joint dispatch agreement, what's happening there is really energy only is being exchanged between the two companies.
That is my understanding. That would be a very good question to ask the next witness, Mr. Bergerami.
Okay, and then, oh, thank you. And then I think you also answered, but I want to make sure that I understood you, that the company conducts its real-time dispatch based on its own system, it does not do that based on the entire or a combined DE Carolinas and DEP system, correct?
Again, that would be my response, because there are transmission constraints between the two jurisdictions, but yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then same answer for the commitment of units. That would be based on the DE Carolina system and not for the entire, for a combined system.
Again, my understanding, that is correct.
Okay. Now you also testify about a change in the dispatch order for each type of generating facility. This is on page 7 of your testimony, lines 22 to 23. So just let me know when you're there.
Yes, I'm there. Mm-hmm.
And you say that's due to essentially low natural gas prices, right?
That's correct. Again, the dispatch, the incremental dispatch is based on the variable cost, which is for the most part fuel and reagent. That's correct.
Now, so during the test period, calendar year 2020, what did that change in the dispatch order look like, just in a kind of layperson terms or directionally?
Well, and I don't know how many years, when you say change, are you just talking about change from 2019 to 20 or 2015 to 2020? It's been a gradual change, but as gas prices have continued to fall, and as we have added newer technologies to the DEC fleet, for example, WS Lee combined cycle, between the efficiency of the new technology and the gas price, it will start impacting how we dispatch coal. Thus, Allen Station, which used to be base load with a high capacity factor, as you mentioned earlier, the capacity factors have dropped because it's a lower, less efficient unit.
So would you just, I think I'm understanding you to say that there's been a change underway for some time in how units are dispatched due to changing economics of natural gas. And would you say that trend just continued during the test period, or accelerated? Was there any change in that trend line?
Well, I think rather than guess, we could probably get you the data. I think John Bergerami would be a good witness to have that data, more readily available. But yeah, I would say certainly over time, gas prices have, over a period of time, have continued to decline, and we've added higher efficient technology generation to our fleet, which changes, as I mentioned before, the dispatch of how we dispatch them.
And essentially you're dispatching coal units less.
It all depends on that fuel price. A good example is where we have added the capability to burn gas at a couple of our coal facilities. In fact, we burn gas if that fuel is less costly than coal at a period of time. So it depends a lot on the cost of the fuel. It depends considerable amount on the cost of the fuel, yes.
And just one other point on this, related to this, you mentioned, let me see, where is it? It's on towards the top of page 7, page 8 of your direct, line 4 and 5. You mentioned benefits, real benefits in cost of fuel and reduced emissions for customers. So those benefits come from primarily dispatching coal units less, and so you have lower emissions, lower fuel costs, and less emissions as a result?
Yes, if you dispatch more of the combined cycle fleet, less CO2 emissions, and certainly less cost to the customer.
All right. Just one last couple of questions, or a few more questions for you on another statement that you made in your direct. This is on page 11 of your direct testimony. Starting on line 17, I'll let you get there. Let me know when you're there.
I am there.
Okay, so you say the company is managing the impacts, favorable or unfavorable, as a result of changes to the fuel mix and or changes in coal burn due to competing fuels and utilization of non-traditional coals. Overall, the goal is to effectively comply with emissions regulations and provide the optimal total cost solution for the operation of the unit. I would just like to unpack that a little bit. When you say changes to fuel mix and favorable or unfavorable impacts, what are you talking about there?
Well, I would go back up to the top of that page at the question that reads, how does DEC ensure emissions reductions for environmental compliance? So favorable would mean if we were burning gas versus in a combined cycle versus coal, certainly there would be less CO2 emissions. That's favorable. Unfavorable would be if we were burning more coal based on prices in terms of CO2 emissions. But at the same time, we continue to be compliant, which with whatever fuel we're burning, we're going to comply with the regulations.
Okay, similar question for changes in the coal burn. Can you talk a little bit about the impacts, favorable or unfavorable, due to changes in the coal burn?
Again, the favorable and unfavorable, it would relate to the emissions question. So favorable being less CO2 emissions versus unfavorable would be more CO2 emissions. But the customer, again, we're going to burn the most efficient and less cost fuel. Customers benefit.
Well, that actually anticipates what I think might be my last question, or maybe last couple questions. You use the term optimal total cost solution. What do you mean by that?
Point me to the line.
Oh, sorry, it's on line 20 on page 11. The optimal total cost solution for the operation of the unit.
So the optimal solution today is around cost and compliance. And so when we burn coal, it takes different reagents to ensure our air permits are met, as well as burning that type fuel. When we burn a different fuel, there's different reagents that are required. So it's the total optimal use of fuel and reagents to comply and reduce emissions.
Okay, I think I understand. So the total, your use of the word total there is intended to embrace both the fuel and the fuel-related costs.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. And you mentioning that in your testimony because of the company's obligation to operate its units to minimize the fuel and fuel-related costs for the benefit of customers.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Immel. That's all I have for you today, or all I have for you in this proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Moore.
All right, Mr. Moore, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Good afternoon, Mr. Verderame. I just have a couple of questions for you. I think the majority of mine are going to be looking at your rebuttal testimony. Has the company looked at ways to replace the transportation service that would have been provided by the Atlantic Coast Pipeline?
Madam Chair Mitchell, I thought we were going to do the rebuttal later.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Kaler. This is concerning his direct testimony. The remainder of my questions will be later.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Moore, you may proceed.
Do you want me to repeat that, Mr. Verderame?
No, that's fine, Mr. Moore. So yes, I think the company recognizes that it has an incremental need for interstate upstream firm transportation capacity. And, we are in discussions with several counterparties. We've made no decisions or come to no definitive conclusions or agreements.
Has the company looked at acquiring capacity on the Mountain Valley Pipeline?
So Mountain Valley Pipeline is certainly one of the counterparties that we are having discussions with.
In your testimony on page 10, you stated that firm transportation capacity is important because it allows the company to avoid imbalance penalties on the Transco pipeline. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Has the company incurred any imbalance penalties during the test year?
No, and we work very hard to not incur penalties.
Did the company experience any service disruptions during the test period due to inadequate natural gas supply?
No, we did not during the test period, no.
Okay, that's all my questions for Mr. Verderame's direct.
All right, redirect, Mr. Kaler.
Thank you. Just one or two questions for Mr. Immel. If you could turn to page 9 again to the chart where you were asking questions on, Mr. Immel.
Yes, sir. I'm there.
So you were asking questions about the NERC average for the time period 2015 to 2019. Now that 2019 obviously does not include the pandemic year that we started in 2020. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And you did indicate that the COVID and the pandemic did have some impact on your ability to bring in outside contractors and to perform work at the same level as you would have, but for that experience. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And I believe you mentioned with regard to the review period for the coal-fired EFOR, which was the forced outage rate, that the 15% on the DEC system would have been probably 5% had it not been for the outages at Marshall 3 and 4. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Thank you. No further questions for our panel.
All right, questions for the panel from commissioners? All right, I'm hearing no questions for the panel. So gentlemen, you are relieved for the time being. You may step down and I'll entertain a motion. Mr. Kaler.
Yeah, I would move that Mr. Emmel be excused from the hearing since he did not have any rebuttal testimony. So the rebuttal would just be Mr. Verderami. And I would also move that the exhibits that were marked for identification be admitted into the record at this time.
All right, Mr. Kaler, hearing no objection to your motion as to the exhibits to Mr. Verderami's testimony, those exhibits will be admitted into the record. All right. Also, your motion that the witness be allowed to step down is granted. Anything else, Mr. Kaler?
Thank you. I would ask also that the company's application, which we file on this, be admitted into the record also.
All right, hearing no objection to that motion, Mr. Kaler, it is allowed. I'll note for purposes of the record that the company filed both confidential and redacted versions of that application. So we need to take care that confidential information is redacted from the transcript as appropriate.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. And that would conclude the company's direct case.
All right, with that, I will turn to Ms. Thompson. Mr. Moore?
Yes, Chair Mitchell. The Sierra Club calls Ms. Debbie Glick to the stand.
All right, Ms. Glick, let's go ahead and get you under oath. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth? Ms. Glick, I'm sorry, raise your right hand, please, ma'am. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. Ms. Thompson, you may proceed.
Ms. Glick, could you please state your name and business address for the record?
My name is Debbie Glick. I work at Synapse Energy Economics, 485 Massachusetts Ave, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket on May 17th, 2021, confidential and public versions of your direct testimony consisting of 43 pages?
I did.
And Chair Mitchell, I'm just gonna, before I move on, I'm going to just, I should have probably raised this in preliminary matters, but the Sierra Club just today filed corrected versions of, in both confidential and public versions of corrections to Ms. Glick's testimony, rather than have her walk us through those from the witness stand. They have been served upon the parties, and then I emailed a copy to Ms. Fennell as well. So just want to inquire whether the commission has received those.
All right, thank you, Ms. Thompson. I have seen them in the docket, okay. And so we will treat them at this point as having been filed.
Okay. Ms. Glick, did you also cause to be pre-filed in this docket today a corrected version of your direct testimony in both confidential and public versions?
I did, yes.
Along with redlined versions showing the corrections?
Yes.
And without going into anything confidential, could you just very briefly explain the reason for and just the nature of the corrections?
Yes, I updated my analysis that calculates the costs, the fuel costs incurred during the test period to reflect the average cost of both coal and natural gas.
Okay. And why did you do that?
The testimony originally used just the average cost of coal.
Okay. Mr. Kaler.
Chair Mitchell, I would point out this time that we did receive this about, I guess, 45 minutes before the hearing, so we haven't had time to review it. It may not be anything that we would take issue with, but I just would like to point out that we haven't had the ability to go in and follow up with any discovery on what, in essence, is new testimony. It may be that it's being filed as a result of errors that we pointed out in our rebuttal, but that being the case, I assume we'll move forward from there.
Chair Mitchell, may I be heard?
You may.
I think it's fairly common for witnesses to make corrections to their testimony that they've either discovered upon further review or that have been brought to light for some reason. So this is not really any different from that, except that for the convenience of the parties and for the commission, we elected to file those, as errata rather than having Ms. Glick go through all the corrected numbers from the stand.
All right, thank you, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Kaler, I'll recognize that you've just received this only minutes ago, so you obviously have the opportunity to explore this with a witness on cross-examination, and we'll recognize your right to do so when we get there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I lost track of where I was. Okay, if the questions put to you in your corrected pre-filed direct testimony were asked at the hearing today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Okay, Chair Mitchell, I would move to have Ms. Glick's corrected pre-filed direct testimony entered into the record as though given orally from the stand, and to have the confidential version thereof remain under seal.
All right, hearing no objection to that motion, it's allowed, Ms. Thompson.
And Ms. Glick, did you also cause to be pre-filed 2 exhibits marked as GG1 and confidential DG2, the latter of which was filed under seal?
Yes.
And were those exhibits prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Chair Mitchell, I would move to have the exhibits attached to Ms. Glick's pre-filed direct testimony identified as pre-marked and to have them moved into evidence with confidential exhibit DG2 being entered into evidence under seal.
All right, Ms. Thompson, we'll hold off on admitting them into the record for the time being, but we will identify them as they were when they were pre-filed, as they were marked when pre-filed.
Thank you. Ms. Glick, did you prepare a summary of your testimony?
Yes, I did.
And would you please provide that to the commission?
Sure. My name is Debbie Glick. I am a senior associate at Synapse Energy Economics, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Sierra Club. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My testimony addresses the analysis and decision-making processes that Duke Energy Carolinas uses to commit and dispatch its coal-fired power plants. The term commitment refers to the company's decision to turn on, keep on, or turn off a coal-fired power plant, while the term dispatch refers to the company's decision to turn up or down a unit between its operational minimum and maximum levels. I show in my testimony that the costs DEC uses to make its unit commitment decisions vary substantially from the fuel costs that the company now seeks to recover from ratepayers in this docket. I discuss how this discrepancy is driving DEC's uneconomic commitment of its coal fleet, and I calculate the excess costs passed on to ratepayers as a result. Finally, I outline recommendations for improving transparency and functioning of the company's unit commitment process. In the past, utilities operated their coal-fired power plants as baseload resources with little thought given to whether the plants should be turned on or off. But in recent years, low gas prices and nearly zero variable cost renewables have pushed coal generation to become marginal and uncompetitive during many hours of the year. Failing to adequately reflect this fact in its fleet operation has caused DEC to run coal plants when it is not economic to do so, saddling ratepayers with excess avoidable fuel costs. Based on my review, I find that DEC's coal units had some of the highest fuel costs among all coal units in the country during the 2020 test year, yet DEC continued to operate and maintain the units. As a result, DEC's units incurred $233 million in variable costs above system lambda, what I will refer to as excess costs, during the test year. The system lambda represents the marginal cost of energy on the system. In an economically efficient system, units are committed based on variable cost, with the lowest cost resources coming online first and progressively more expensive units being turned on until system load is met. But when units are committed using a marginal cost that represents only a small portion of a unit's full variable cost, excess costs are incurred. These excess costs are a direct result of DEC's inadequate unit commitment process. I find that DEC's commitment process omitted approximately $263 million worth of fuel and variable costs, representing over 40% of those costs at its coal units, thus allowing the units to commit and dispatch significantly more than they would if the unit's full variable cost was reflected. Of that $263 million in fuel costs accounted for approximately $250 million. My testimony identifies several potential explanations for the discrepancies between DEC's marginal and actual fuel costs, but none adequately explains the sheer volume of costs excluded from its commitment modeling. I find that even using DEC's incomplete marginal cost accounting, the company can still be found to have incurred excess marginal costs of $8.5 million. My testimony recommends that the Commission examine DEC's production cost accounting, unit commitment process, and operational decisions. Finally, I discuss how DEC did not adequately report and describe its fuel costs, accounting, and unit commitment practices in its fuel charge adjustment application. I recommend that the Commission require the company to provide transparent accounting of its variable cost allocation and documentation of its daily decision-making process and its reasoning for any uneconomic commitment decision. My testimony outlines several pieces of information that would be helpful to the Commission. This concludes my summary.
Thank you. Chair Mitchell, Ms. Glick is available for cross-examination and questions from the Commission.
All right, thank you, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Kaler?
Mr. Glick, did you have a chance to review the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Verderami?
I did, yes.
Based on that, the rebuttal testimony, did you have any reason to alter any of your testimony?
I updated some of the values, some of the corrections I made where I added in the natural gas costs as well. That did contribute to some of the corrections that I made in one of the tables, two of the tables, I believe.
No further questions.
All right, before we move to questions from the Commission, just pause here to see if any other interveners have questions for this witness.
None from.
All right.
Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Creech. All right, questions for the witness from commissioners. All right, Ms. Glick, it looks like you are off the hook for the afternoon. Thank you, ma'am. You may step down.
Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Thompson, I'll take a motion from you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Mitchell, for the reminder. I'd like to move Ms. Glick's pre-filed exhibits into the record with confidential exhibit DG2 being kept under seal.
All right, hearing no objection to that motion, Ms. Thompson, it will be allowed, and the exhibits to Ms. Glick's testimony will be admitted into evidence.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we will turn back to you, Mr. Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. We will recall our witness, John Verderami, to appear for his rebuttal testimony.
All right, Mr. Verderami, I will remind you that you are under oath, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you proceed with a summary of your rebuttal testimony?
Thank you. In my rebuttal testimony, I take issue with and provide detailed objection to Sierra Club witness Glick's testimony and recommendations with respect to DEC's unit commitment and dispatch process. I also disagree with witness Glick's characterization of the performance of DEC's coal units and her assertions that DEC has omitted fuel and variable costs representing 40% of the actual production costs. I categorically reject witness Glick's assertion that DEC has operated its plants with little thought given to whether the plant should be turned on or off. Witness Glick also made generalized recommendations concerning DEC's coal and transportation contracting strategies. But when asked in discovery, Witness Glick failed to identify a single instance of a fuel or transportation contracting issue in this proceeding. The purpose of this proceeding is to establish fuel rates for DEC. Witness Glick has not recommended any changes to the fuel rate proposed by DEC, but instead has sought to leverage this proceeding into an opportunity to opine on a number of topics that are either properly addressed in other proceedings, such as a general rate case or IRP proceeding, or have previously been rejected by the Commission with respect to other Sierra Club witnesses. The Sierra Club, like other parties to this proceeding, has not recommended disallowance of any costs incurred by DEC in the test period in this proceeding, and accordingly, the Commission should disregard the bulk of Sierra Club testimony provided by Witness Glick as being not relevant to a fuel proceeding under the fuel statute and the Commission rules. This concludes my my rebuttal testimony summary.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. The witness is available for cross.
All right, Mr. Moore, I believe you're up.
Yes, thank you, Chair Mitchell. Mr. Verderame, my name is Tyrrell Moore again, representing the Sierra Club. In your role as the Vice President of Fuel and Systems Operation for Duke Energy, you're responsible for the purchasing and delivery of fuel, but also system optimization, correct?
That's correct.
So you would be the correct person to ask questions about how the company structures its fuel contracts?
That's correct.
Are you the right person to ask about the company's commitment and dispatch decision-making process?
Yes, I lead those teams.
I think it would be helpful before we get started to define a few terms. I'm going to give you a couple of definitions, and will you just let me know if at a high level they are definitions? Unit commitment is the decision to turn on or turn off a generating unit or keep online a unit that is already online.
I agree with that.
And dispatch is then to increase or decrease a unit's generation level once it's already been placed online.
Agreed.
And so marginal production cost is the incremental cost of operating a unit based on only the system or the unit's variable costs. Is that right?
Okay, yes.
And is that the cost that is used for Duke's commitment and dispatch decision-making?
No.
Can you explain?
So we use all variable costs for commitment. Like any cost that is incurred because a unit is either committed or dispatched is used for commitment purposes. For dispatch purposes, we only use those costs that are related to the actual change in generation, the dispatch cost. So we don't include start costs and no load costs, or costs that are incurred just to keep the unit online. So I think that's the difference there between categorizing commitment and dispatch as one.
Okay, thank you. And then cost of generation or production costs includes all fuel, fixed and variable, variable operations and maintenance costs, emissions and reagent costs. Is that right?
So that is the cost that goes through rates, right? That we will recover in this proceeding. Right? But the costs we use for dispatch, the fuel costs for dispatch are different costs.
Okay, great, thank you. And so system marginal cost, or system lambda, is the cost to produce an additional or incremental megawatt of generation on the DEC system in a given hour.
Again, only fuel and variable O&M components of those costs, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So I believe Mr. Immels asked this question, but I'll ask it to you. Would you agree that the company has an obligation to minimize all costs, including its fuel costs, while reliably serving load?
Yes, I'd agree.
And the fuel costs incurred by the company are directly tied to which plants are operated?
So the fuel costs we recover are tied to not only the fuel costs, but also the fixed and variable fixed transportation costs.
Well, so if the company runs more fuel generation, they will incur more costs to buy coal. Is that correct?
If the company runs more coal generation, then we will incur more costs to burn coal, yes.
Great, thank you. And then the decision which power plants are operated. That's the company's commitment decision. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
That's right.
Okay. And so the company's fuel costs are also impacted by the extent to which a power plant is run. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's the dispatch decision.
Right.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So in your rebuttal testimony, you discussed the production cost modeling that the company uses to formulate its unit commitment plan. And that's in Trader, is that right?
That's right.
And that model creates a 7-day forecast that shows the marginal cost to operate a unit. Is that right?
So, yes, one of the outputs is the marginal cost.
And so using that forecast, the company then decides its commitment decision. So which units to turn on or off or leave online.
That's right.
So it's fair to say that the inputs into that model have a large impact on the company's commitment decisions. Is that right?
They're fundamental to the outputs. Yes.
I'd like to take a look at what has been pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 6. And this is marked as a confidential exhibit, but I have discussed with the company's counsel, and in the form that it was produced, it does not need to be marked as confidential. We're not going to look at any of the attachments that were provided as well.
All right.
Let me know when you have a chance to pull that up.
All right, Mr. Moore, because we are operating remotely, I want to make sure that we're all looking at the same document. So describe the document, describe the header of the document for me.
Okay. Well, Mr. Verderame, do you have it pulled up?
I do.
Do you want to describe it to the chair?
Sure. Chair Mitchell, it's the header is Sierra Club Exhibit 6, Duke Energy Carolinas LLC, docket number E-7, sub 1250, fuel and fuel-related cost proceeding. Test year ended December 31, 2020. Sierra Club data request number 1-8.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Verderame. Just again, for purposes of the record, the document that has been provided is marked confidential, but Mr. Moore, what I'm hearing you say is the document is not in fact confidential. And I'd like Mr. Kaler to confirm that, please.
That is correct, Chair Mitchell.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kaler. All right, let's go ahead and mark that exhibit, Mr. Moore.
Yes, so at this time, I would like to mark what has been pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 6 as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit 1.
Okay, the document will be marked as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit number 1.
Mr. Verderame, do you recognize this document?
I do.
So in this data request, the company responded that one of the inputs used to make its unit commitment decisions is the price of fuel. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And for the purposes, this is under company's response to question A. And for the purposes of the model, the price of fuel is defined as the market price of fuel plus variable transportation costs.
Correct.
And just to confirm, the market price of fuel means the price the day the unit commitment decision or the model was run. Is that right?
So coal prices curves are updated weekly. So it may not be the exact day, but you know there's a different time scale to coal markets than there are to gas markets. So gas prices we update daily, coal prices are only updated weekly.
And the market price is not what the company is asking to recover in this proceeding, correct?
No, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Returning to the data request, the company stated that fixed transportation costs are considered fixed and are not included in the unit commitment decisions. Is that right?
That's correct.
But you are asking to recover fixed transportation costs for fuel in this proceeding. Is that right?
That's right.
Does the company consider the costs associated with fixed tonnage requirements or must-take provisions in their coal contracts as fixed costs?
So we don't have any must-take provisions in our coal contracts per se. So I would say no.
Okay. Great. On page 10 of your rebuttal testimony, lines 16 to 17. Let me know when you're there. I'm going to read you a bit of that.
Hold on one just second, please. Okay.
It states, the fact that certain units are not required to operate at times does not equate to poor performance or mean that the unit are not necessary to ensure reliability. Did I read that right?
The second half of the sentence, yeah.
What do you mean by required to operate in that sentence?
So by required to operate, we mean to meet a reliability condition to serve native load.
So is that referring to a commitment decision or a dispatch decision?
So that would be a commitment decision and a dispatch decision.
Okay. So a unit is dispatched in real time when its marginal production costs are below system lambda. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Can you explain?
So a unit will be dispatched. It might be dispatched above system lambda because it's either required. It could be required for reliability, to be online for a transmission constraint, or just a load requirement.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a look at another exhibit. This has been pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 2. Let me know when you have that pulled up.
Okay, I'm there.
Can you describe what this document is?
So this is a data request.
Is it data request 1-4?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Sierra Club data request 1-4.
And do you recognize this document?
I do.
Chair, at this time, I would like to mark this exhibit, what has been pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 2, as Sierra Club Cross Exhibit 2.
All right, the document will be marked Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit number 2.
So looking at this document, it asks for hourly data for when units are committed for reliability reasons, correct?
Yes.
And did the company object to this request?
So we did object to a portion of this request.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any more questions on that exhibit, so you can put it away if you'd like. If you look back and saw that a unit had not been required to operate for months at a time, would that be a sign to you that the unit was not necessary to ensure reliability?
No, I would not.
Can you explain that?
So, and this is somewhat part of the IRP planning process, but we plan the system to meet peak load requirements. And there are certainly periods during the year where the unit would not be required, whether it's an anomalous weather year or whether it's just, just a shoulder month period where load requirements don't require us to dispatch or commit a unit. Doesn't mean the unit isn't important to providing reliability. Otherwise, we would be, forced into relying on the market to go out and purchase to meet those loads. So we plan to meet the loads as a reliability strategy and commitment.
We're not going to look at any of the numbers in this exhibit, but in formulating your rebuttal testimony, did you review Ms. Glick's confidential Exhibit D?
Let me find what D was, if I could. I reviewed the whole. I didn't review all the work papers, but I did review exhibits that were in the work papers. Is that Exhibit DG2? Is that it? at the end?
Correct. I believe that is right. Give me 1 minute. Yes, that's correct.
Yes, I did.
Obviously, you disagree with Ms. Glick's conclusions, but do you dispute any of the calculations that are in that exhibit?
So I didn't validate the calculations, but I will say that I fundamentally disagree with the methodology of the loss in terms of being compared to system lambda in any way. I just don't think that's an appropriate. I know that's not an appropriate way to assess whether a unit is valuable to a system or not. And I think when I first started reading this, I tried to get my arms around what the witness was trying to get across, other than working backwards from a conclusion. But really what I came to is I think there's a conflation here between market methodologies and non-market methodologies. I noticed in her testimony, she uses words like price suppressive effect and revenues and losses. I think these are terms used in structured markets. And I think the idea of using system lambda as some type of a proxy for an LNP in a structured market, which is maybe a more fulsome kind of representation of costs, is really just fundamentally wrong. It doesn't make any sense, and to me and my team.
Okay.
So I will say I can't agree with these numbers.
Okay. On page 14 of your rebuttal testimony, you said that the company provided every 7-day ahead unit commitment forecast in a supplemental response to a Sierra Club data request. Do you recall writing that?
Yes.
I'd like to take a look at that. So this was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 5.
Hold on, I have to go back to my exhibits.
And again, Chair, this is marked as confidential, but I have talked to the company counsel, and in its current form, it does not need to be marked as such. We're not going to look at any attachment to that document.
Correct, Chair Mitchell.
Okay.
Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Chair, at this time, I would like to mark what was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 5 as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit 3.
All right, the document will be marked as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit number 3, and counsel for DEC has confirmed that the document is not confidential.
So again, on page 14 of your rebuttal testimony, where you're talking about the company providing the 7-day ahead unit commitment forecast, this is the document you're talking about?
Well, the 7-day yes, okay. The 7-day forecast was, I believe, part of this exhibit, right? It's not in this document.
Correct. I believe it was to question B, which I'm going to read it and you let me know if I read it correctly. Indicate whether the company performs economic analysis to inform its unit commitment decisions for its coal units. And then B2 says, if so, provide all analysis conducted during the test year 2020 in native machine readable format. Is that correct?
Right, correct.
And so in your supplemental response to that request, the company did provide its unit loading forecast. Is that right?
That's right.
And are you familiar with those?
Yes.
And so on page 6 of your rebuttal, you discuss the inputs into your daily analysis to determine your unit commitment plan. And let me know if these sound like the inputs to that plan. You mentioned forecasted customer energy demand, fuel commodity and emissions allowance market prices, contractual obligations, including power market purchases and sales, generating unit parameters, and planned unit outages. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the unit loading reports that were produced in response to data request 1-9B, do they indicate the forecasted energy demand?
So yes, they do. I believe it's one of the top lines.
Do they contain the fuel commodity and emissions allowance market prices?
So the market prices are embedded in the GenTrader model. This 7-day is a forecast of the output of that model. It doesn't have those. It doesn't display those market prices.
So do they contain the company's contractual obligations?
I don't believe the contractual obligations would be part of a fuel input, right? Because we use replacement cost of fuel.
Well, I'm referring to the documents that you produced, the unit loading reports produced in response to 1-9B. Did they contain the company's contractual obligations? What was given to the Sierra Club?
I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, I'm not tracking the question.
Okay, we'll move on. Do you know if the unit loading reports contain the unit generating parameters?
So actually, I don't have it open. I don't know whether it has the mins and maxes. I do know it recognizes when a unit is at its forecasted min or max, or somewhere in between.
So the GenTrader model recognizes that?
GenTrader, that's one of the inputs to the GenTrader.
But it is not necessarily defined in the output of that model.
I think it's displayed in that output as the color of the number. I mean, you may have a black and white version of it, but.
So I guess the key question is all of the pieces of information we just discussed are a key part of the decision-making process that the company undergoes, correct?
That's right. And they're all in the GenTrader model as inputs to the model.
But what was provided was the outputs to the model, is that correct?
That's right. We really did our best to try and provide what you were looking for here, given, what is machine readable and what's, what cannot be condensed into something that can be emailed.
Correct. So, but as we said earlier, the inputs to the model are important to getting to the output, correct?
Yes.
On page 7 of your rebuttal, you discussed, and we talked about this a little bit, why you believe system lambda is not an appropriate measure for unit commitment decisions.
That's right.
And your argument is that system lambda is the measure of the instantaneous system incremental cost, while unit commitment decisions are based on total cost over a multi-day period. Is that right?
That's right. Well, total variable costs.
Right. How do you measure whether a unit is projected to provide benefits over a multi-day period?
So I think that is the output of the GenTrader model. That optimization model looks at all those parameters and determines what units should be on and when they should be cycled off or kept on through to the next period when they would be needed as the least cost solution.
And Ms. Glick did actually acknowledge in her testimony that there were times where a unit might operate even though its operational cost exceeded system lambda. Isn't that right?
I believe there was one nod to that, but the majority of the testimony is fundamentally based in this idea of averaged system lambda costs as a metric of either unit efficiency or dispatch efficiency.
Right. If the company's forward-looking analysis ends up being wrong in hindsight, it's not necessarily an imprudent decision. Is that what you're saying, basically?
I'm saying that we make decisions with all the information we have available to us in terms of unit availability, projected load, weather. The weather is, we have a saying, the forecast is always wrong. It's never going to be right. But we do our best to get it as close as we can, and run the system in the least cost, most effective way we can for customers to minimize costs.
So if the company looked back on their analysis and found that their analysis was consistently wrong, would you agree that that would be something the company should look into?
So we do look back at that analysis. We look back at it every week. and we trend it. And yes, absolutely. If we saw that it was deviating from, significantly from our planning parameters, then certainly we would go back and look at it. We have metrics around load forecasting, weather forecasting, solar forecasting. These are all things we watch very closely because they all inform how good the load forecast is and ultimately how good the plan is for what generation is dispatched or committed.
Would you agree that if a unit consistently committed at a marginal production cost in excess of system lambda, that should prompt the company to take another look at its decision-making process?
No, again, the commitment decision is inclusive of all the variable costs, the start cost, the start fuel, and these no load costs, right? They are by definition more expensive than the instantaneous cost to move 1 megawatt above another. It's just a flawed metric. No one uses the metric. RTOs don't use a metric like that. Honestly, if that was a boundary for how we dispatch plants, that we could never dispatch or commit a unit that had a higher than the system average lambda for the day, we'd curtail load most every day.
Just 1 minute. I want to take a look now at what was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 7. And again, Chair, this was also marked as confidential, but I've talked to company's counsel, and in its current form, it does not need to be marked as such. We're not going to look at any of the attachments.
Okay.
That's correct, Chair Mitchell.
And Mr. Verderame, do you recognize this?
I do. I'm there.
Does this appear to be DEC's response to Sierra Club Data Request 1-3?
1-3 it is, yes.
Chair Mitchell, at this time, I would like to mark what was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 7 as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit 4.
All right, the document will be marked as Sierra Club Cross-Examination Exhibit number 4, and counsel for DEC has confirmed that the document is not confidential.
And I'm going to read a portion of that data request, and you let me know if I read it correctly. On the second line of the request itself, it says, please provide the following hourly information for the year 2019 and the test year. And then it says, if not available at an hourly scale, please explain why and provide the most temporally granular scale available. Is that right?
That's correct.
So then request F is asking for the accounting fuel cost. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the company, can you read the company's response?
This request seeks an analysis, calculation, or compilation which has not already been performed. Instead, please see attached confidential monthly average cost of generation in dollars per megawatt hour of the company's coal-fired generation units for the test period January 2020 through December 2021. Yeah, we simply don't have that data broken down on an hourly basis. We provided it the way we calculate it and the way we recover it. And I'll just mention that F also includes G below it as a part of that number.
Right, and so G was asking for the accounting variable cost of production, and the company similarly objected to that request. Is that right?
Yeah, we just didn't have it and really couldn't figure out a way to put it together for you. I believe we provided everything else on the hourly granularity.
1 second. I think we're going to take a look now at what was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 3.
I think I have these stored in order. Okay.
And do you recognize that request?
Yes.
Can you read request A?
Provide the hourly production costs used for purposes of unit commitment and dispatch for each DEC and DEP unit dispatched under the joint dispatch agreement for the year 2019 and the 2020 test year.
And the company objected to that request as well?
Well, I believe we partially objected to it. We objected it because 2019 was outside of the test period, and we did provide all that information for DEC, but this is a DEC case, and we didn't feel that the DEP data was appropriate or relevant to this case.
On page 3 of your rebuttal testimony, you state the content and structure of the company's application in this proceeding conforms to all applicable legal requirements. Is that right?
As I understand them, yes.
Are you an attorney, sir?
No,
So you're not offering a legal conclusion there?
I am not. That's
And
what I
would you
said.
agree that it's up to the commission to decide whether the application meets all legal requirements?
Yes, and it's my understanding that we have, or else I believe we would have been met with something from the staff or the commission itself, and we certainly would provide anything that the commission asked for, but I believe we have met that standard. In what we
No further
provided.
questions. Thank you, Mr. Verderame.
Thank
And
you.
Chair, at this time, I would like to move all of the exhibits into the record as marked.
All right, Mr. Moore, just for purposes of clarity, would you identify those cross-examination exhibits individually?
Sure, I'll go through them. We have what was pre-marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 6 is now Sierra Club Cross Exhibit 1. What was marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 2 is now marked as Sierra Club Cross Exhibit 2. What was marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 5 is now Sierra Club Cross Examination Exhibit 3. What was marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 7 is now marked as Sierra Club Cross Examination Exhibit 4. And then what was marked as Sierra Club Exhibit 3 is now marked as Sierra Club Cross Exhibit 5.
All right, Mr. Moore, we did not mark cross exhibit number 5. So let's do that now. We will mark for identification what was Sierra Club exhibit number 3 as Sierra Club cross examination exhibit number 5. And why don't you make your motion again, Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move the cross-examination exhibits into the record as marked.
All right. Hearing no objection to your motion, it will be allowed. All right. At this point, I want to check in with our court reporter. We've been going for about an hour and a half. Linda, how are you doing? Do you need a break?
I'm doing well. I don't need a break. That's
Okay.
fine.
All right. Well, let's proceed then. Mr. Kaler, any redirect for your witness?
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Just a few questions. Mr. Verderame, you've been involved in this case. Are you involved in other cases that the company files with the commission, rate cases, IRP proceedings, those type proceedings?
So no, not in North Carolina, have not been.
And you did have an occasion to totally review the testimony filed by the Sierra Club witness, did you not?
I did.
Is it fair to say that that you take you disagree with virtually everything that this witness has included in her testimony? Would that be correct?
I'd say other than our agreement on what commitment and dispatch is, yes, I can't find a lot of common ground in anything in their testimony.
And do you compare what she's testifying to on our system to maybe what happens on an RTO or regional transmission organization?
I do believe that's the lens she was viewing this through.
And are you aware that the Sierra Club has had other witnesses that have testified in recent DEC cases that have brought up these same issues?
I am.
Your Honor, I would object to this line of questioning. I believe this is relevant to Mr. Verderame's direct and is not relevant to his rebuttal testimony.
All right, Ms. Kaler.
I believe it is relevant. And I think.
All right. I'll allow the question to go forward, Mr. Kaler. Just limit your redirect to matters pertaining to the cross-examination on this witness's rebuttal testimony, please, sir.
Okay, I believe you answered that already. Mr. Verderami, I believe that you have indicated that the company did all it could to respond to the data requests, and there were numerous data requests requiring a tremendous amount of work on behalf of company personnel. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Were you aware that if the Sierra Club propounded any follow-up questions to the responses that we provided in these particular data requests?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Are you aware that the Sierra Club objected to
Oh,
and had any follow-up data requests to these responses that have been provided?
yes.
And do you know whether or not they filed a motion to compel the company to respond more fully to any of the ones that we objected to?
I was not aware of any motion to compel.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
All right, questions for the witness from commissioners? Okay, I am seeing no questions for the witness from commissioners. So at this point in time, Mr. Emmel, you may step down and be excused, sir.
Verderami.
I'm sorry, Mr. Verderami, I'm sorry. I
I knew,
apologize. Mr. Verderami, we appreciate your testimony here today. You may be excused. Mr. Kaler, abundance of caution.
Yep.
I'd like for you to move the witness's rebuttal testimony into the record, please, sir.
Exactly. I would move that the rebuttal testimony of Mr. Verderami be accepted into the record as if given on the stand today.
All right, Mr. Kaler, hearing no objection to your motion, that's the 17 pages of rebuttal testimony filed by Mr. Verderami will be copied into the record as if delivered orally from the stand. All right. At this point, I believe we have come to the end of at least the cross-examination times that were identified by the commission. I will check in with counsel to see if there are any other matters that need to be addressed before we move towards adjournment.
Chair Mitchell, I'm not aware of any. I think we've moved that all our exhibits be entered into the record. I believe we asked that the application be entered into the record, and I think this would conclude the company's case.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaler. Ms. Thompson, I see that you are appearing. Do you have anything for the commission's attention?
No, thank you, Chair Mitchell. Nothing for the Sierra Club.
Okay. Well, as is typically the case, we will entertain post-hearing filings, briefs, proposed orders, 30 days from the notice of the mailing of the transcript. Of course, you're absolutely welcome and encouraged to file those sooner than that. And with that, I thank you all for your preparation and participation in this hearing today. And unless there is anything else for my attention, we will be adjourned.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell.
All right, let's go off the record, please. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.